She walked into the courtroom with an expression no one expected to see at that moment. Instead of the usual discouragement seen in cases so serious, the 18-year-old faced the cameras with a crooked smile, as if she were in front of a cell phone and not about to answer for the loss of her own mother. It was September 5, 2013, in Aurora, Colorado, and that behavior, so removed from the context, made the courtroom freeze. The defense claimed severe mental disorder. But those who witnessed that scene saw something that went beyond the lack of remorse, an absolute detachment from reality. During questioning, that psychological abyss would become even more evident. The contradictions, the disjointed phrases, the insistent refusal to acknowledge her own name. Everything revealed a fragmented mind, fighting against something no one there could see. For investigators, it was impossible to ignore how much that young woman seemed to be living inside another identity, as if admitting who she really was meant confronting something unbearable.
Don't tell me how to do my job.
I watch forensic files.
Do you believe everything they put on TV is real? How stupid are you? Yeah. Really, Isabella? Does that make any goddamn sense to you?
Stop calling me Isabella.
That's your name!
No, it's not.
Authorities would confirm every detail through testimonies, court documents, and psychiatric evaluations. And the more they investigated, the clearer it became that this was not simply the story of a domestic crime. It was the portrait of a young woman whose perception had split into multiple versions of herself, and one of them was desperately trying to escape what had happened. With each disconnected answer came a persistent plea: identify me, examine me, prove me. I am not that person. When agents called her by her real name, she corrected them: that name isn't mine. This rupture did not appear out of nowhere. Tensions within the family had been building long before that night. The mother, always dedicated and patient, had been facing increasingly unpredictable behaviors. On the day before the crime, an intense argument ended with the daughter spitting in her mother's face, a line that had never before been crossed. Even so, no one imagined that explosion would signal an approaching tragedy.
Isabella Guzman. She's accused of stabbing her mother 79 times.
With breaking news in Aurora this morning, police are now looking for this woman. They're calling her a suspect in a deadly stabbing overnight. A woman was found dead in a home on South Lima Street.
Isabella had grown up in Aurora as an only child. From very early on, behaviors considered unusual worried her mother enough that, at 7 years old, she made the difficult decision to ask the father to take custody. The parents' divorce when she was 3 had already left marks, but this change did not bring the improvement the family hoped for. Over time, disturbing episodes were added to an adolescence filled with conflicts and impulsive choices that no one could fully understand. When she returned to her mother's home at 14, the signs of imbalance intensified. At 18, her behavior had become so threatening that even the stepfather, always more rational and hopeful, recognized that something was very wrong. The mother herself had begun to fear her daughter, even though she tried to hide it behind a love that insisted everything could still get better. On the morning before the crime, she received an email with only 3 words: "You will pay." The strangest part, the message wasn't addressed to her, but to a woman named Cecilia. This detail, seemingly small at first glance, would completely change the way the case was interpreted. Fearing escalation, the mother called the police. Officers spoke with the young woman, explained the legal consequences, and emphasized that, as an adult, she could be removed from the home if she continued behaving aggressively. But none of it seemed to reach her. It was as if the warnings couldn't cross into the world where she was trapped. The mother, searching for an alternative, asked the biological father for help. He believed he had managed to calm her after a long conversation in the backyard. Only later would he realize that he had not been speaking with his daughter as he imagined, but with someone already deeply disconnected from her own identity. That night, the mother came home from work carrying fast food to share with her husband, a routine gesture that, ironically, marked the last minutes of normality in that house. She asked if anyone had seen Isabella. The stepfather said he hadn't seen her for more than an hour. With her heart tight, but trying to keep the routine, the mother decided to take a shower. She went upstairs unaware that, at that moment, her daughter was already there, immersed in delusions that turned her own mother into a stranger. Within minutes, screams and heavy noises filled the upper floor. The stepfather ran, believing it was just another violent argument, but found the bathroom door partly open, being pushed from the inside. He realized something terrible was happening when he saw the floor begin to stain. Desperate, he ran to call emergency services. When he returned to the stairs, he He heard his wife call for help with the last breath of strength she had left. He tried to force his way in, but couldn't. When the door finally opened, the young woman walked out with an empty stare, holding the knife used in the attack, as if it carried no emotional meaning for her at all. The wife was lying on the floor, gravely injured. The phone operator tried to guide him through an attempt at resuscitation, but the scene showed there was no chance left. In just a few minutes, he had lost the woman he loved, and discovered that the stepdaughter he had raised with so much effort had become responsible for the tragedy. Emergency services arrived quickly and confirmed that the victim had not survived. The scene was devastating, and the one responsible had fled. Police issued an immediate alert, stressing that she was in an unstable mental state and might pose a risk. For more than 16 hours, no one knew where she was. Until the next day, when a call reported someone apparently lifeless inside a car in a parking lot. When officers arrived, they found the young woman asleep, covered in the dried blood from the previous night. On the ground near the vehicle were her belongings, the weapon, and clothes marked by the escape. Hours earlier, security cameras had shown she had entered a supermarket still consumed by panic, asking strangers for help and inventing a confused story to justify the state she was in. Even then, she did not request official assistance. It was clear she was trying to avoid any contact with the police. The arrest happened without resistance. But what unfolded in the interrogation room would become one of the most unsettling moments of the entire case. There, in front of the investigators, she seemed like a different person. She spoke confidently as if she were a 15-year-old teenager who had run away from home in Ohio. She offered invented details with conviction and insisted that everything was a mistake. "You need to do a DNA test," she repeated. "I am not who you are saying I am." When her biological father entered the room, hoping his presence would stir some connection, the young woman looked at him like a stranger. The man broke down. And in that instant, the investigators understood they were not dealing with denial, but with a complete rupture of identity. Months later, in 2014, reality surfaced in objective form. Tests, reports, and witness accounts confirmed she was living with a severe case of paranoid schizophrenia, accompanied by intense delusions and auditory hallucinations. To her, her mother was no longer there. She had been replaced by an imposter named Cecilia. And insistent voices ordered her to eliminate that supposed threat. The specialist's conclusion was unanimous. She had no awareness of reality at the moment of the tragedy. Even the prosecutor, known for firm positions, chose not to challenge the insanity claim. The judge, faced with the evidence, ordered that the young woman be committed indefinitely to the Colorado Mental Health Institute, where she would remain until she no longer posed a danger. The environment there was entirely different from the prison system. Instead of punishment, the focus was treatment. The structured routine, the medications, and the constant supervision began to rebuild what had once been the young woman's original identity. The psychiatrist in charge reported that, with the correct use of medication, the delusions began to fade and clarity slowly returned. For the first time after months of psychological collapse, she began to see the world as it truly was, and would have to face, with lucidity, the irreversible weight of everything that had happened. She was finally regaining contact with reality when the hardest part came, confronting what had happened. As the delusions dissolved, a brutal emptiness emerged, the understanding of the real impact of what she had done. At this stage, many patients face a kind of suffering that blends guilt for having survived with trauma, for being the cause of the tragedy itself. The Institute's team created a rigorous treatment plan for Isabella. Individual sessions 3 times a week, therapeutic groups focused on psychotic disorders, constant medication adjustments, and structured activities to develop coping strategies. Inside those walls, she not only relearned how to manage daily life, she also reclaimed what the abrupt confinement had interrupted. She studied for the GED and with time began taking introductory courses in psychology and social work. An attempt to understand herself through the lens of science. After a year and a half of hospitalization, the psychiatrist responsible, Dr. Pounds, recorded remarkable progress. Isabella was correctly following her entire medication routine and had not shown psychotic symptoms for more than 12 months. She showed understanding of her own disorder, reacted emotionally in an appropriate way, and managed to speak about the case without diving back into the delusion. But the progress did not erase the shadows. The depression persisted. The anxiety too. And in more than one moment, she reported self-destructive thoughts. The recovery moved in a straight line only on paper. In real life, it was full of curves and setbacks. Then, years later, something completely unexpected hit Isabella without her taking a step outside the hospital. Old videos from the 2013 hearing began circulating on social networks. Clips from the day when she barely recognized her own identity, turned into content, remixed with music, ironic captions, and edits made by strangers who had never read a single page of the case file. The scene in which she points to her own eyes, once seen as a painful portrait of a mental collapse, became a meme. The video spread at an absurd speed. In a short time, hundreds of millions of views appeared in hashtags that treated the episode as spectacle. The disorganized behavior that, at the time, reflected a severe episode came to be seen as attitude, disdain, or even as something iconic. Superficial comments about appearance filled the posts, while the suffering of two families was reduced to disposable entertainment. For mental health professionals and criminal justice experts, that was alarming. Many recalled that romanticizing psychiatric crises destroys any chance of real understanding. For Yun's family, the pain became public again, but now distorted. And for Isabella, the psychological impact was deep. Discovering that her worst hours were being consumed as entertainment generated even more guilt, confusion, and withdrawal, issues that needed to be worked through carefully in therapy. While all this was happening outside the Institute's walls, inside them Isabella continued walking the long path of rehabilitation. In 2020, after 7 years of treatment, she began requesting conditional outings. In the same period, she decided to speak publicly for the first time since the case. The interview was controlled and short, but it generated repercussions. There, Isabella spoke about situations of abuse she said she had lived through in childhood, especially after breaking with the family's religion in adolescence. She also mentioned having been injured during the incident with her mother, showing scars on her hands. She stated that, under treatment, she had regained stability and that she did not represent a risk. Her words revealed someone trying to understand her own past, even if part of it remained fragmented. At another point in the interview, Isabella recounted something even more delicate. She said she had been sexually assaulted inside the institution years earlier, in 2015, by someone who worked there. According to her, the case was reported to the hospital's police department, but technical difficulties in the report prevented the continuation of the complaint. This episode added another layer of trauma to an already complex history. From 2021 on, Isabella received authorization to participate in therapeutic sessions outside the unit, always accompanied and monitored by GPS. They were small steps toward a possible reintegration, not full freedom. Each outing meant putting years of treatment to the test, and observing whether the stability gained was maintained also outside the protected environment. Isabella's case then came to be studied not only as a crime, but as a deep portrait of how severe mental disorder can manifest silently until it explodes. It demonstrates what can happen when signs are ignored, when treatment arrives too late, and when the system must decide between punishing and treating. It shows also that even after a devastating episode, there are situations in which proper treatment can restore clarity, stability, and awareness. For the family, however, no clinical progress eliminates the suffering. Ryan, who lost his wife that August night, always recognized the role of the illness, but still lives with the irreversible absence of Yun. Other relatives are divided between understanding Isabella's condition and the definitive weight of the loss. Cases like this expose the permanent tension between justice and mental health. On one side, a young woman who succumbed to a psychotic episode so severe that she lost her own identity. On the other, a life interrupted in an irreparable way. Between these two extremes are difficult questions. Can someone in crisis be held responsible in the same way as someone fully aware? How far does the duty to protect society go? And above all, is it possible to rebuild life after something so extreme? Today, there is still no definitive answer about Isabella's future. Her possible release depends on continuous clinical evaluations, judicial reviews, and decisions that balance risk, humanity, and prudence. What is known is that her story remains open, and will continue to be analyzed by specialists as an example of how lack of treatment can destroy families, and how the correct intervention can, sometimes, rebuild what seemed lost. Between the backstage of mental health and the rigor of justice, the Isabella Guzman case remains as a warning, and at the same time, as a study on the human capacity to regain reason when given proper support. It is a story that remains alive, not because of viralization, but because it raises questions we still do not fully know how to answer. And for those seeking to understand cases in which mind and law collide in such a complex way, we continue investigating, analyzing, and bringing context so that stories like this are seen not as spectacle, but as deep lessons about responsibility, treatment, and prevention.